Hi everyone, welcome to our Lunch and Learn today. We'll be taking questions at the end of the session, so feel free to submit any questions you have via the Q&A, which will be at the bottom of your screen. For now, I shall hand over to LogicMonitor's John Rakowski and Ted Baker's Simon Brealy to tell us about their intelligent monitoring best practices.
No problem. Thank you, Caroline, and good afternoon to everyone who's joining us on this webinar today. So firstly, let me say I hope you've all managed to get the lunch which you want for lunch, so from Deliveroo. I know Simon was saying he's ordered a nice healthy chicken panini, so if he kind of darts out, if he darts out during this kind of webinar to go and pick it up, he is just going out to get his lunch, so don't worry about that. So this is the first potentially in a series of LogicMonitor best practices webinars, where we're talking to our current customers, where we're working with our technical teams to give you best practices in regards to monitoring. And the focus today is on Ted Baker and their approach to intelligent monitoring using LogicMonitor. So firstly, let me say a big warm welcome to Simon, who's head of IT at Ted Baker. Are you okay today, Simon?
I'm very well, thank you.
Cool. So we're going to go through a number of sections. All these sections are basically focused on exploring Ted Baker's IT environment and how they're using LogicMonitor today. And we're going to go into some best practices in regards to monitoring strategy in general. And we've got 10 questions. And as Caroline has said, we're going to have some opportunity for questions at the end as well. So please submit them via the window which you've got on Zoom to submit those questions. Well, we're going to go through the following areas. We're going to cover a little bit of background. We're going to focus on why LogicMonitor, the current situation at Ted Baker. And I know probably it's the same current situation for everyone here. I'm at home today. Everyone's at home. And so we all know we're kind of going through this, I hate this phrase, the new normal, which is COVID-19. It's not normal at all. So we'll cover some of how Ted Baker have adapted their working practices to the current situation which we're in. We'll then focus on how they're looking at returning to normal and how LogicMonitor is helping that transition to going back to normal, back to the office, back to those Ted Baker stores opening. And then we'll do a little bit of focusing on what next. And again, at the end, you're going to have time for some questions. So it's pretty informal. I hope you're all enjoying your lunch as well. So let's get started with our first question. So let's move on to background. So Simon, easy first question. Can you tell me a little bit more about Ted Baker from a business perspective? Because I know probably everyone is potentially aware of Ted Baker. I know I've got some of the shirts, some of the clothes from Ted Baker, but tell everyone a little bit more about Ted Baker from a business perspective.
Yes, certainly. So you should see on the screen there's the kind of company overview there. A little bit of background on it is Ted was was started in the founder's mum's kitchen 30 odd years ago, making shirts, and kicked off his first store in Glasgow with a partnership with a local dry cleaner, which kind of got the whole service and partnership mentality that's ingrained in the brand going. That has grown dramatically to, we've got well over 300 stores worldwide, or 300 sites worldwide, and we've got over 2,500 team members reliant on all of our systems and leaning on all of our technology, with a very different picture for revenue of 800 million in 2019. As you can imagine, 2020 has been a bit of a different story for everybody. Yeah. And one of the key things that I think people don't realize about Ted Baker is Ted Baker was never based on a real person. He was a fictitious character created to be whoever the customer could imagine them to be. So there's a lot of would Ted do it that way, and who Ted Baker is, mythology going around that goes with the business. But it's an unusual organization in terms of we essentially run under a story.
Oh, right, okay. And when we were kind of talking about this yesterday as well, you mentioned that originally when Ted Baker was set up, those stores also offered dry cleaning as well as part of the purchase.
Yeah, so one of the key differentiators that came about in the first few stores and that continues to this day in certain locations is partnering with service providers near to your store. And it was the original offer was within the first month, you could take your brand new shirt that you bought from Ted Baker to the local dry cleaners. I think that you had 2 dry cleaning vouchers for every purchase. So
Wow.
it's a deal struck with all the local dry cleaners, and with that's expanded to we've got Ted's grooming rooms and hairdressers and wedding planning and fitting and all sorts of things, dependent on the location and the skill set of the team.
Yeah, and I love the purpose and goal of Ted Baker here. I love a life less ordinary. Well, we can say that life is definitely not ordinary now in the current situation which we're in. But actually, it really emphasizes the brand, doesn't it? In terms of, when I think of Ted Baker, it's always those very kind of vibrant kind of shirts, very vibrant clothes, very on-trend clothes, and it's about that confidence when you're wearing a Ted Baker shirt. I mean, the fabric qualities are always kind of very good. I must admit, I love the idea of the dry cleaning as well. One of the things my pet hates is ironing my shirts every Sunday night, which not as much during this situation. I've put on a shirt today, but generally I'm not wearing that many shirts at the moment. So thank you for a little bit of kind of background. So let's move on to the next question. So let's delve a little bit more into your role. So what's your role at Ted Baker, your responsibilities, and what does your day-to-day look like?
So I'm responsible for everything tech, in TED. So I look after all IT infrastructure, the e-commerce platform, cloud services, and all information systems globally. I've got a team of just over 40 here in the UK, East and West Coast US, and a team in Asia.
Cool. And what's this picture on the slide here? Is it some kind of, what's a lobster on the
our red lobster that adorns the front door of our head office, which is the ugly brown building, which lives up to its name in every possible way you can imagine.
So it's definitely, obviously ugly from the outside, but definitely very nice from the inside, I'd imagine.
It's been very fashioned up on the inside, but the exterior of the building it still looks like the 1970s Royal Mail sorting office that it was.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've seen it, obviously. I've actually walked past this building before, and it's always an interesting building to walk past in London. So obviously you're responsible for all of IT infrastructure, and obviously does that kind of include as well monitoring tools, monitoring strategy?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've got an integrations and monitoring team that report directly into me, and one of their core remits is our system monitoring, and the primary tool that we now use in Ted Baker is LogicMonitor for that purpose.
Perfect. Okay, so let's move on to the next question then. A little bit of a deeper dive. So now we're going to focus more on the IT landscape. So what does the IT landscape look like?
Ever evolving, I think, is
ever evolving.
So we're predominantly a Microsoft house with our core ERP is Dynamics 2012, and we are a very prevalent Office 365 user. Underlying technologies that we use in store and Office sit with VMware, Fortinet. You've got the list on the screen. I don't need to read it out. It's a fairly standard list of products. But yeah, one of the key things that we're doing is looking to improve our application stack and capitalize more on cloud and what we're doing in the cloud at the moment.
Fantastic. And, I'd say this list is very typical of any kind of enterprise organization. You've got a whole mix of different delivery technologies here. You've obviously got VMware, the virtualization technologies. You've got Citrix, probably Citrix is being highly utilized right at this moment. You've also got Cisco technologies in there. You've also got key applications. I can see the Microsoft stack, obviously Office 365 being extremely important in the situation which we're in right
my
now.
lunch has just this second arrived. I'm going to grab it and I'll come back up.
Look at this. You can tell this webinar is not recorded. It's definitely live. So I'll just carry on. So basically, you can see Ted Baker's IT environment here is typical of an enterprise environment. Also, they're utilizing Azure and also AWS. So it's a complete cloud shop, you could say. And I suppose this is very typical of any of the organizations who have joined us on the webinar today. So Simon, have you got your panini?
I'm back. I've got the latte and I've got my panini as well. I'll get to the panini later.
There you are. Yeah, we can try and eat and talk. It's always difficult to do that, but the best people can do it, I've heard.
I'll stick with the drink because I put on a white t-shirt in.
Oh, that's messy. Yeah, you don't want to kind of spill that coffee down that white t-shirt. So look, we talked about this a couple of days ago as well. So right now, obviously, you've got a mixture of different cloud platforms, Azure and AWS. What's the kind of split there? Would you say, what's more your strategic kind of partner when it comes to cloud?
So we have a larger presence in AWS at the moment, but there's a strategic driver with Azure. The AWS side of things is predominantly our e-commerce platform, which is naturally a very large chunk of our estate. The Azure side of things is where we're evolving as an organization, and it's predominantly around back office functions and what we're doing there within the business and how we're sharing data internally. And there's a definite driver within the business to get to a more cloud-centric organization, mostly around the driver for it's a commercial advantage, but also the flexibility, particularly in light of recent events and what's been happening in 2020. The ability to flex your IT estate is becoming more and more critical.
Yeah, definitely. And like I said, this is pretty typical of many organizations as well, especially large organizations. And I suppose from a monitoring strategy perspective, if you're looking at monitoring solutions, probably some of the key drivers there were the fact of you needed a solution or platform which offered a high degree of extensibility, being able to monitor these different technologies and be able to monitor in different cloud environments as well. You need to kind of be able to have all this information and data in context, I would say. Is that right?
Yeah, it's from when you're running multiple estates, when you've got multiple different stacks, knowing exactly what's going on and what's being utilized is key to not just providing a good service, but also providing a commercially viable service, being able to see what utilization across the different platforms and how well we're utilizing our capital expenditure.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, let's kind of move on then to focus a little bit more about the decisions for LogicMonitor. How was your coffee, by the way?
It's really good, actually.
Good one.
It's a new place. I've not tried it yet, so.
Good stuff. So let's kind of move on to the kind of decisions for why LogicMonitor. And firstly, what was the situation before LogicMonitor?
Before LogicMonitor, Ted's monitoring was very siloed, very old. I was going to say old-fashioned. It is a bit of an old-fashioned approach in that traditional. Yeah, let's go with traditional. Better. So as it says on the screen there, it's, we had numerous tools being used by numerous teams. Nobody was looking at the same panel of information. Nobody could see the same escalation process. And it was very, very siloed. And the other side of that is there were a lot of very manual processes in TED, and a lot of things were dealt with spreadsheets and uptime reports in PowerPoint that were emailed out at the end of the week, and very early 2000s approach to communicating IT effectiveness within an organization.
Yeah, and I've, from my career, I've been involved in kind of monitoring, and whether as a consultant, engineer, I was also an analyst at Forrester Research a number of years ago. And generally, this is like typical across kind of any organization. I remember kind of working with one major bank, and this is going back to, I think it was 2008 actually, when I first had this meeting, and we're kind of in this meeting room proposing the use of a monitoring solution. I'm not going to say what else the monitoring solution was, but that was a traditional monitoring solution. In fact, I will say it was Microsoft SCOM, very kind of traditional kind of version. And actually, we were going in, and I was working on behalf of Microsoft, and effectively what we found was that there was a lot of the kind of processes were manual reporting, so they're adhering to SLAs. But the problem is with that manual reporting and looking at PowerPoint spreadsheets, a lot of the times that information is always out of date, and it's subject to people's point of view as well. Is that kind of fair to say what the situation was at Ted Baker before?
Yeah, it opens it up a lot to interpretation when you're using manual reporting, and there's also an element of it's just an email that goes into a list of hundreds of emails people have received, and it goes to the bottom of the list, and it becomes something that only ever gets pulled out by the business when there's a problem. And one of the big achievements that we've got is we've turned monitoring into a useful tool and a proactive tool within the organization. But it's, the amount of Excel sheets and PowerPoint sheets that were sent around the business, it was just noise to the people who we actually wanted to be consuming this information.
Yeah, so it's about removing the noise, getting the signal, I suppose. And this is
the right information in front of the right people when they want it, and not
exactly
days after when you've had a chance to compile a PowerPoint.
Yeah, and I suppose this goes back to, we'll come on to some of the tips later on, but it's about understanding your audience as well. With any kind of monitoring implementation, it's about understanding that it's not collection of data. You get these concepts of, we're a data-driven business. Well, that's fantastic. But actually data without context is just little bits of fragmented data. And actually what you need to do is put it into context, change it into information. And actually that's the power of monitoring. I would say it's not just about reducing MTTR. Obviously that's a major use case, but it's how you utilize that data, turn it into information, put it in context to actually start to understand and to be more proactive. That's always kind of a useful phrase to kind of throw in, but it's about being more proactive, but actually more predictive, using that data to start to understand situations as they evolve. I would say that's some of the benefits of monitoring. Yeah,
definitely. There's a lot to be said for using monitoring as almost a brand tool for the IT department. So it's something that we've been able to elevate our department's reputation within the organization, because we can present facts and figures in a very digestible and appropriate way to those who need to see that information, and it's there immediately, and it's customizable to what they need week to week. And it's particularly in the current environment, it's proven to be, well, let's say the current environment would have been a lot more stressful for me than it currently is.
Yeah. That's definitely true. I'd say, and I love that phrase as well. If you're using monitoring well, it's kind of like a marketing tool. It's about emphasizing the brand of IT. No one can argue with data or information, should I say, which is in context and which is kind of in real time. So if it's accurate, it becomes that way of promoting IT's value.
Definitely.
Okay, cool. So tell me about the setup and adoption process for LogicMonitor and any tips you'd like to give. And this is not just in regards to LogicMonitor, but just in monitoring in general.
Yeah, I think our deployment was fairly organic, and it was something that we tested, and our test kind of grew into our use case, and that grew into our production and monitoring. The gents who put it together and launched it, they turned it around in a few hours to go live with our first instance. The big learns off the back of that, as we've got here, our planning is probably the number one piece of advice I can give, and having an idea of what your monitoring should look like before you start working on putting your monitoring together. It's very easy to go into a platform like LogicMonitor and create oodles of dashboards, lots of information, but do it in a way where it's very difficult for people to get to, because you have the ability to create dashboards and sub dashboards and things like that, and it's very easy to bury the relevant information, whereas you need to have that at the top. And to do that, that's purely a planning and your organization of how you're going to present this. And we actually split it out, particularly around the different departments within the organization. So We have a dashboard for our retail teams. We have a dashboard for our e-commerce teams. We have a dashboard for our integrations teams and our logistics teams. That information is dramatically different and sits within a completely different set of dashboards, because when they're doing their work and they need to go and get that information or have that information on their screens in the office, when and should we go back, we don't want them having to trawl for that information. So it's very much a planning out where it's going to be presented to them.
Yeah, and I always kind of look at, monitoring in itself is a strategic tool. It's a strategic approach more than anything. So, from my experience, generally it used to be that monitoring solution decisions were always based on a project need. So going through my kind of past career history, I remember doing this is a long time ago now, Simon, I remember doing an upgrade from Windows NT to Microsoft Windows 2003. So we did a whole AD migration as well as for a government organization. And right then, that was the prompt then to start looking at new monitoring tooling, new monitoring solutions. And sometimes the problem with that is that's a very tactical way of looking at monitoring. You've got to understand that monitoring, again, is not just about that immediate need. It's about how you utilize data and information to make more intelligent decisions. That's why I love some of the tips which you put on here. Obviously, I can talk about LogicMonitor, the fact that we're agentless, it's very easy to deploy. But I think you've got two key areas. You've got the installation, which you've got to plan that and everything. But there's a more important area, I would say, which is this idea of adoption. How do you get the solution or the platform adopted in the right way? And this is where I think it's your fourth bullet point here. Spend a little time making dashboards attractive.
Yeah,
that's key.
I think the biggest challenge in TED going live with LogicMonitor at the time was not getting LogicMonitor deployed to a point where it was a useful tool and working for us. The challenge that we had was getting the business and getting our colleagues to use it as the go-to tool and to action the alerts and have the right information. And it comes back to that planning and organization things. And a lot of the time that was dealt with by the guys who put it together, sitting down with the relevant parties in the business, asking them how and what they wanted to see, and then them spending the time to turn it into something that, number one, visually represented what they were looking for, and number two, was something that they were happy to look at. If you can have the best information in the world, if it's in a manner that people just don't like looking at, they're not going to look at it. And we had to learn that the hard way. A lot of time and effort went into this, and we had to change a lot of our dashboards and a lot of the way that we presented information to the business to turn it into an easier to digest set of statistics and numbers for them. And it's worked. We have got, we've put together a small monitoring team specifically to deal with the requests for monitoring that come in from the business now.
Yeah, that's always understand your audience, I think, is the key message there. Yeah. And just one final question in regards to this is, do you have a dedicated kind of monitoring team? So you've got actually people who are just focused on monitoring?
Yeah, so I've got an integrations and monitoring team. Within that, I've got a monitoring specialist. The team themselves, each of them can work within the LogicMonitor platform. They know how to put together the dashboards and the reporting and work on the escalation processes. And something else which I'd recommend is, once you've set your escalation processes, don't be surprised when they start changing, and as teams evolve and change and environments change, you need to be willing to change how you escalate and manage escalations on a regular basis. But I have a particular individual within the company who is kind of my monitoring champion, and his role is to sit down with people in the business, really understand what they need to achieve, and start putting together their proof of concepts. And he'll go through probably 3 or 4 iterations of dashboards before they'll agree what it is, and that's what we'll go live with. But I think it's usually a couple of weeks of toing and froing the actual Jan setting it up and launching this usually takes a couple of hours. The getting it to what the business want usually takes a couple of weeks.
Yeah, yeah. It's a good kind of tip, I would say, as well, is that especially with any kind of strategic solution, then having someone dedicated to that is definitely a
Well,
benefit.
it can't be an afterthought. If you're going to do it and capitalize on this information and capitalize on tools like this, you can't do it as a secondary thing to someone else's job. This needs to be a primary focus for at least one person to do it properly.
Perfect. Let's move on to the next question. So what initial benefits did you get from using LogicMonitor?
Everybody seeing the same data, absolutely. My personal major benefit was a lot less alerts. So I wasn't subscribed to the 4 or 5 other monitoring solutions that were
The
in
sea of red.
the teams.
Yeah, it's normally you normally see that the sea of red. I've seen so many kind of environments where different monitoring tools, and you kind of face with this console. So many of these red alerts are coming in, and you just don't know. You can't see the wood for the proverbial trees.
Well, and this is it, and because again, another major advantage of having a single team looking after monitoring is you can set monitoring standards, and you can set what standards attain to a priority 1, priority 2, priority 3 incident. And that means that you only get escalations on priority incidents, not things that individuals deem a priority. And one of our key, going back to the major benefits for the organization, we were able to present the business with relevant data and everybody to see the same data, but being quite a large retail estate, we were able to present our support partners. So we have a retail support partner here in Europe, and we have one in America, and they are able to see live status of all of our retail hardware, how it's behaving, all of our networks, our tablet devices, and our upsell and cross-sell products and services within store, and to proactively see when things aren't behaving ahead of the guys in store having to raise tickets to get something looked at.
Yeah, I love this dashboard which we've got in front of us as well, because that's actually showing you monitoring the actual store tills. Is that right?
We are monitoring every till, tablet, access point, switch, and server in every single retail estate we have.
Wow. So you've got dashboards for all of them. That's pretty incredible.
And our European support, our European retail support team and retail management team have access to their relevant geographical dashboards. So the guys looking after Amsterdam can see what's going on in the Amsterdam tills, and because we have used this to become a very open department, and we're very keen to show people what's working and what's not. You get rid of a lot of the panic and a lot of the, oh my god, a till doesn't work. They can see that there's a problem with something, an alert's been raised and it's been acknowledged.
Yeah.
And it allows the people who need to fix the problem to concentrate on fixing the problem rather than telling people that they're going to fix the problem.
Yeah, gives everyone that situational awareness of what's going on, I'd say. Cool. Another benefit, cut the tool sprawl. I think you've already alluded to some of this.
Yeah, this is quite a good one, because I think previously we had 3 or 4 different products presenting exactly what's on this one page, on this one dashboard prior to going live with LogicMonitor. So we cover all of our network monitoring now through LogicMonitor and use it for all of our alerts and escalations. And again, it's just, the number of devices and number of services that we're monitoring, and having set decent thresholds and alerting criteria, we don't need to apply anymore. This is working really well for us. Granted, some of those dashboards, some of those graphs are a little bit noisy, but you can filter them down to the specifics that you're looking for. But it gives you an idea on just how many we've got covered there.
Yeah, and obviously this is pertinent to the right person in terms of looking at this. It's interesting. Okay, let's move on to gain credibility with the business. So I think we've touched on this as well.
Yeah, it's gaining credibility from the business is really useful, really key for what we've done in the department here. again, there's no opinion when you're presenting monitoring stats and when you're presenting dashboard information. There's no we had a good week, we had a bad week, or we think this happened. It's here are the metrics, here's how the business is performing, here's how your technology is performing, and here's where the problems have been. It's very open, very honest, and very direct to the business. And because we did that, and we are incredibly open with the dashboarding and the information that we share with the organization, we've gone from the IT department, who were almost seen as in the way or sat at the back of the building, to very little happens in the organization now without someone from IT being consulted first. And one of the usual first requests is, how can we monitor this?
Yeah.
So we need to know if it's going to be successful. Can you work with us to put together a way of making sure that it is successful once we've delivered a project?
Yeah, and we've got some other screenshots later on which go into more of that business data and how you're using LogicMonitor to monitor that business data, but definitely gaining credibility of the business. Any strategic monitoring platform should help doing that, so it's great to see how you're using LogicMonitor in this way. Let's move on to the next question. So let's focus on the current situation. Now, the current situation is you're about to tuck into that chicken panini.
And obviously working from home, as with everybody else.
Let's go on. Let's touch a little bit more on in regards to the current situation of COVID-19. So how has Ted Baker adapted both from a business and IT perspective in the last 2 months?
Yeah, Ted Baker was not a particularly flexible organisation in terms of ways of working. 99% of the organisation worked from offices all of the time. An awful lot of the business and almost all of the business leadership had never worked from home for more than half a day here and there. We were very fortunate to be able to turn around the situation, because we had moved the entire organisation in the previous couple of years over to laptops to promote flexible working, with a view to look at flexible working as a key business improvement point over the coming months and years. This kind of accelerated that decision-making process for the business, and it put a huge amount of, I don't want to say pressure, but a huge amount of focus on our VPN and our Citrix environments and that side of things for the remote connectivity back into our core services, which up until we went into the lockdown situation had never been challenged in the way that they were. Thankfully, and through some good planning and organisation, it worked out really well. But yeah, we monitor everything in and out of every connection in the business. I actually do pretty much a daily meeting which goes through how the health of everything, and we kind of roll through the dashboards and make sure that everything's looking green at the moment.
Yeah, have you got those top level dashboards as well, which talk about the IT services in general or the applications? So you're monitoring from that perspective, you can give updates, and you probably run those meetings using that, is that right?
Yes, we do it for top down. So we have the kind of, what's our AX environment like, what's our VPN environment like, how's our e-commerce platform, and if it's that'll give us a red, amber, green status. If it's amber or red, you can drill into it, and you can drill right down into the problem point within those dashboards. It's usually, thankfully, most mornings are, how's everything doing? It's like, a couple of alerts and nothing major.
Major. That's always the best way of having every morning, I would say. So I love this picture as well, by the way, of the little girl, the woman on the computer. That's exactly the way I feel sometimes. I've got 2 daughters, and this happens quite regularly, especially in the afternoons when they're getting a little bit bored. They like to come in and just interrupt me. I've had to put a sign up on the window today to say don't come in. Okay, let's move on to the next question. So how have you adapted technically to working from home, and how is LogicMonitor helping?
Yeah, so these are the dashboards I was just talking about, actually, in terms of what we're doing with our VPN and Citrix and the remote working data. having previously only ever had a dozen or so VPN connections active at any given time because of how the organization was structured, to switching to point hundreds of VPN connections and hundreds of Citrix licenses all being used at the same time, and putting pressure on the Citrix estate and our VPN connectivity. Being able to utilize these tools to proactively manage and maintain those environments has been critical, because any downtime at the moment is, it's not the same as if there's an issue with a VPN when 95% of the team's in the office. They're in the office, they can pick things up. Now, if there's no VPN or if there's no Citrix enabled, the workforce stops. And we have to be very, very proactive in maintaining those environments. And we communicate this out to the business as well. We let them know how this is performing. Obviously, the ability to work from home is, in the top 3 priorities for the organization as a whole, as it's the only way to keep the business functioning.
Yeah, so on this dashboard, we can see we're monitoring the VPN connections, which I think is Fortinet. You've got the Citrix licenses, and it's quite interesting actually. Obviously, LogicMonitor is a SaaS-based platform, and we can see through kind of our back-end reporting, we can start to understand what are the most monitored technologies and to run reports. And actually, in the last 2 months, what we've seen is that across the board, all of our customers now are monitoring more and more of the Citrix environments. That's the Zen app, Zen desktop environments for the VDI delivery of those desktops. That's kind of really interesting. Also see here, obviously, you monitoring Microsoft Teams. So that's like Office 365 and the Teams functionality. I can see that Ted Baker, majority of you are iPhone users. See that?
I would say probably about 99% are iPhone users.
Yeah, so you've got like such a wide variety of data on this dashboard. I think the most important thing is the tick box in the middle, which says no alerts. That's probably the one thing which kind of draws my attention.
Yeah, it's a kind of front and center as well.
Yeah, exactly. Best place for that. Cool. Yeah. Let's talk about another benefit.
Yeah, so this is the photo studio. So our photo studio, for those of you who don't know on the call, Ted Baker do all of our own photo shoots and editing and design and all of that internally. Ted as an organization is very precious about its imagery, and I'm pretty confident in saying that they have not deleted a single image in the 30 years the business has been organized, and we generate huge numbers of imagery be it for use on social, be it for use in store, on promotional materials, on e-commerce. There is any single garment or item can create upwards of 50 to 100 images, when each season contains a couple of thousand items, and we're doing 4K imagery, it starts to attack our storage quite aggressively. So we use this to manage our data and where we're storing and how we're archiving our data when the studio's working remotely, because what we don't want is those file services to become bloated and slow. We want them to maintain responsiveness. So whenever we see a peak, there's a bit of proactive work to make sure that we're moving off and archiving and controlling that data set.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's obviously showing the breadth when we talk about monitoring. We're not just talking about enterprise or traditional enterprise technologies. You've got elements such as this, which is this work from home photo studio and looking at the studio age files. Let's kind of move on to one more then, because when we talk about monitoring, it's not just the technical data. So obviously with this adapting to work from home, it's about monitoring business data as well.
Such a great graph, isn't it? Is you can see when we essentially shut a planet. It's from our retail income flatlining for well over a month there, and you can see where trade was behaving kind of normally, and then it started being brought down over the last couple of days whilst they were active there before it went so quiet. And then we can see as individual pockets around the world are starting to be reopened, and we're having to obviously abide by both the country's legislation and also the local region's legislation within each country as to whether or not we can and how we can open, and whether or not it's viable for us to open, because we can use this around what our income was for that particular site this time last year, compare that against what the cost is going to be to prepare the site to reopen under the guidelines at that moment. And some of them are cost prohibitive because of the way the stores are set up, and some of them are very, very easy to turn around and are worthwhile doing based on the revenue, and we can pull all of that from these.
Yeah, and they always say, a picture paints 1,000 words. Well, what you said, it's like the closing of a planet in regards to this dashboard. But there's a better dashboard coming up. But again, this kind of emphasizes when it's about monitoring. Monitoring from a technical perspective is obviously important, but ultimately it relates to a business metric. It relates to something which the business cares about. And that's what you kind of want from any strategic approach to monitoring, is to relate it to kind of business metrics, I would say. So let's look at the better picture then, or not the better picture, but the upswing in regards to this.
The flip side, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's our e-commerce platform. When retail went away for a while, e-commerce has filled that gap to a certain extent, and it's you can see where there's a very clear spike in activity on e-commerce, and that's maintaining. And we're able to use this information combined with the live data from our retail estate as we are reopening globally, and in the next 4 or 5 days some UK sites are going to start opening up again. We can use that data again and compare it with the e-commerce information and come up with a plan of what needs to open, when it needs to open, and in what capacity it needs to open. But yeah, this is definitely the more preferable one that everybody in the business currently prefers to look at than the other, if I'm honest with you.
I know I've been on your website recently as well. So let's move on to kind of what does the return to normal look like. So how is Ted Baker and your team preparing to return to normal?
When we figure out what normal is going to be,
good question.
We will be able to answer that question completely. But it's the prioritization is obviously, we're in a business where we need to make sure that we're keeping revenue up versus cost. We need to keep an eye on what our partners and neighbors are doing, and engage with retail consortiums as to what's going, what they're planning and how they're going. We also, again, I mentioned earlier about what we have to do in terms of the legislation and the local government guidance and local health and safety executives and things like that. There's a lot to consider for every single site. And then from an IT and technology point of view, this is a lot of this is hardware that's been turned off or unused for months on end now. And a lot, as probably quite a few people on this call would be familiar with, when you leave things turned off for any period of time, turning it back on is always a little bit nerve-wracking. You never know exactly what's going to happen, and we've seen problems, and we've got logistical issues in terms of getting replacement hardware from one country to another, and how do we move a replacement store server from the UK to Germany is a recent example. And the logistics of doing that, and the cost implication of doing that. And what we're doing is to try and be as proactive as possible. We are going into each store, spinning everything up a couple of weeks ahead of when we're expecting them to open, re-enabling all the monitoring, running some tests, and basically keeping an eye on how the monitoring behaves. And that way, if there is a problem, hopefully we've given ourselves a week to 10 days to resolve it before it's due to trade again. Yeah,
that's interesting. Obviously, I can see the worry of those tills there. I know kind of my major worry last weekend was actually trying to start my car. I'm not running it for kind of months, and that was kind of my main worry there. Cool. Let's move on to the last question which we've got in this, which is what's next for Ted Baker IT?
Well, again, figuring out what the new normal is going to be and how we're going to work in that. I don't think we're ever going to go back to the old design of everybody working in the office 100% of the time. I think we're going to become a much more flexible team. We are very much on a journey into cloud and software as a service already, and that's only going to continue. We will be definitely driving that cloud and flexibility in line with what we're doing. You know, there are tools out there which, if used properly, we won't need to use things like VPNs and bits like that, and we can use true as a service tools and get ourselves away from another constraint really in that flexibility. Monitoring is going to remain a key priority for the department and for the organization as a whole. BI is a very big driver. There's been a lot of change in the way Ted Baker operates as an organization over the past 18 months to 2 years, and information and insights is critical, and it's being driven by a very information hungry team of executives who want to extract as much as many metrics out of the organization as possible. And then obviously there on the horizon we've got logs and anomaly, which are, you know, coming from LogicMonitor. We've got some tests going on at the moment, but we're very, very early days on that.
Yeah, you're currently one of our kind of beta customers. I know you're testing that integration. So Anomaly was the products which we, or the company which we acquired at the start of the year to give us that insight into logs, and we're currently integrating that into our platform as we speak. So I know you're helping in regards to that, which is great. So I love that kind of phrase. You're moving kind of more to cloud. I think one of the things when we talk about that new normal, it is really the reality that it's no longer about being SaaS. Software as a service. I think many organizations are really kind of driving now to be cloud first. It's about cloud applications, cloud-based infrastructure, cloud-based platforms. So that's kind of interesting. I think that's happening across the board. So look, Simon, that's been kind of really interesting. I could probably chat to you all day, but I'm going to open it up to questions from the audience. So Caroline, have we got any questions?
Yes, we have. We've had a few questions come through. I've just got one here where I think someone wants a bit of clarification about this and asked, does this tool only look at hardware?
No. So if it presents ones and zeros and metrics that you can track, you can put it into the dashboard. So we have our retail, and we actually have our trading figures off of our e-commerce platform presented in a daily revenue broken down by region for the entire of our e-commerce platform, presented in the dashboards for Europe, US and APAC. Yeah,
so LogicMonitor can monitor any metric effectively. As long as you can, the collector can pick up those metrics effectively, you can send the metrics to the collector, you can monitor anything. So whether it's, we just recently launched our Cloud Monitoring Accelerator program, actually, Simon, which is about monitoring cloud-based applications such as Office 365, Zoom, like what we're using today. So it's extremely easy to be able to monitor any metric.
Right, and we've got another one here. How do you find monitoring your Meraki devices? Have you turned off all monitoring within Meraki?
We haven't turned it all off yet, but that's because we're still in the rollout of the Meraki estate. The plan is to use the LogicMonitor dashboarding exclusively and the Meraki solution to deep dive into problems on local machines if needed.
Right, and another one's come in. How do you classify your critical kit with the tool? So I'm guessing that means sort of how do you classify sort of what's critical within LogicMonitor, I'm guessing.
Do you put that into like service views or different dashboards?
Yeah, so it's again, this is very much led by the organization in terms of what's critical to our production team being able to create and design versus what's critical for our e-commerce team to be able to support and run the website are very, very different. So they each need to have their own priority one kit that has a specific set of parameters around its monitoring and alerting. But yeah, it's almost departmental that we go through as to, you know, we prioritize our instance within the organization as a A P1 is a global incident that impacts the entire business based on revenue or reputation. A P2 is it will impact a department or a team of people, and it goes down from there.
I've got one here. Why LogicMonitor and not another monitoring system? Which is a bit of a tricky question.
Yeah, so I can answer that kind of really frankly, actually. So in my previous role before I joined Ted Baker, I had the joy of using pretty much every top tier monitoring tool going, because I worked in an organization that owned other businesses and I adopted all of their monitoring tools as they were purchased. So yeah, I'd probably say that in that role, I had the top 5 all being used at the same time. And when we were looking at the monitoring solution for Ted Baker, we went through an RFP, we looked at the options and how it was going to be for us to deploy, what it was going to be cost to deploy, and how we would maintain it internally and what that maintenance would look like. And this won out. To be completely honest with you, we set what monitoring tool's right for us, and this is the one that was.
All right. How do you deal with notifications from LogicMonitor? Is this automated to different teams, so like infrastructure or dev, or is it handled by the monitoring team?
So it is automated, obviously, once you've set up your rules and triggers. So our current route is text. We use text message and voice calls, depending on the alerts. Our first line engineers will quite often get a text message about till issues or an email around till issues. If it's a network, then it will automatically call our network engineers. If we've got a SQL problem, it'll automatically contact our DBA, sorry. And we kind of work it that way.
Cool. And let's see. Is it possible to let business develop their own dashboard with a little training instead of having a development team?
Yeah, I don't have a development team. I've got a guy who was a service desk engineer who basically over a period of 6 months has become very adept at putting together and distributing very useful dashboarding and monitoring windows for the business.
Excellent. And do you have a list of applications you currently monitor, version control included? Gosh, this is a very technical question. I'm sorry, guys. Do you have a list of the applications it currently monitors, version control included? Some monitoring solutions previously found unable to provide sufficient data due to age of application.
Yeah, I mean, I'll handle this from a support perspective. So from a LogicMonitor perspective, obviously, we've got our public documentation and configuration guides, which if you go to, I don't know the exact URL, but if you type LogicMonitor monitoring and go to our configuration guides, you'll see the list of the different technologies that we're able to monitor, what we call logic modules. And within them, we've got specific data sources for all the different elements that we can monitor. One thing I'll say about LogicMonitor, and I've worked at different monitoring organizations as well, is that LogicMonitor's got that breadth and depth of monitoring. So we pride ourselves in extensibility. So it is not just about the new applications, those cloud-based applications or cloud-based technologies. It's also about those traditional ones as well.
Good answer, John. And one more here. Someone currently partners with a service provider for their e-commerce platform who have their own monitoring solution. Can LogicMonitor integrate with other monitoring solutions to consolidate data in one space?
Well, I can take that one as well. The answer is yes. I mean, any kind of monitoring platform which you're looking at today, and the ones which you have in your own environment, you should be looking at open API, so REST API-based platforms, so which allow you to kind of pull in data or export data. At LogicMonitor, we're constantly looking, if you look at, I'm talking about kind of our roadmap, the ways in which we can pull in more data. So we're looking at things like Prometheus data, push metrics, looking at things like open telemetry in the future as well from an application perspective and tracing perspective. So our integration, because we're an API-based platform, obviously we integrate with kind of any of those kind of different platforms out there. And from an ITSM perspective, it's platforms like ServiceNow. Now, in regards to New Relic, from my perspective, and I've worked in the world of APM as well, I'm very focused on the application area. And if I was to classify LogicMonitor, I would say that we're an infrastructure intelligence platform. So we're more focused on the infrastructure, understanding the performance of that. And obviously we do provide those viewpoints into IT services and also application monitoring, but it's not the same level currently today as New Relic. But in the same way, New Relic does not provide that level of that deep depth in regards to infrastructure monitoring.
All right.
I think just on that, so because we're actually very similar to that. We have a service provider for e-commerce who do use their own monitoring tools, which is in the same lines as New Relic, which we use around customer journey and the UX side of things. However, both ourselves and our service provider, having given them some dashboards on it, are looking to move over to using the LogicMonitor for essentially the engine and performance of the platform.
That's good news. Another one here for Simon, I think. How hard was it to get business metrics like your e-com revenue into LogicMonitor?
It wasn't that difficult. I mean, I didn't do it personally. Well, the guys who did it, but my understanding is it was a couple of clicks to set it up on as a dashboard, and then it's either a SQL or PowerShell query to pull the data itself. I know it was done in the morning to get all of our e-com stats. I know that because it was asked of, at 10 o'clock in the morning. By lunchtime, we had our first version of it live.
Pretty impressive.
Pretty quick.
Yeah. And how broad is the adoption of LogicMonitor at Ted Baker?
It's probably now one of the most utilized tools after the likes of Teams and Office. Our execs all have the LogicMonitor app. Our entire IT support team globally use the LogicMonitor support app, and most managers in the business who rely on the technology have a dashboard that they can keep an eye on from. And the commercial side of things, the business users are mostly interested in the commercial dashboards, and they can pull out what revenue is being taken at any given time. So we're currently in a summer sale event, and it's not unusual for me to get a text message with a screenshot of a dashboard with it's a smiley face if it's a good day, or is there anything wrong? things like that. I quite often get those kinds of text messages from people.
Fantastic. Well, I haven't had any more questions come in, so I think we might have exhausted everyone there.
Everyone's finished their lunch.
That's it.
Except for Simon.
No, I'm going to start mine in a minute.
Well, in that case, I'd like to thank both of you for joining us today, and I'd like to thank everyone that joined us virtually for our Lunch and Learn today. Thank you so much, everyone, for taking the time out, and hopefully we'll see you all again soon.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Simon.
No problem. Thank you very much for having me.